Okay, so today I'm going to try to explain how I went from this to this in just 1 year. Now, I began playing the piano back in the summer of 2019, and prior to that, I didn't have any experience at all with any instruments actually. Like most people do, I had always told myself the same story, that if you want to learn how to play an instrument, you should probably start when you're a child, and even then it's going to be extremely time consuming and difficult. And on top of that, if you're not musically gifted, well, you might as well just give up beforehand. And that was all up until I got to borrow my sister's old keyboard. I simply decided to put all of that aside and actually give it a try. And it wasn't even that long into the process before I quickly found out that all of those mental blocks that had kept me from starting before couldn't have been more wrong. In any case, I decided to document this journey, and I ended up uploading a bunch of videos sort of showcasing my progress. Those videos ended up getting a bunch of views and a bunch of comments from people who wanted to know how I had made the progress that I did, and even from some people who didn't even actually believe that the progress that I did make was authentic, which I guess I should take as a compliment. So to answer the question, how did I go from having zero experience with the piano to playing a relatively complex piece like the Fantasy Impromptu only 1 year later? And in order to get into that, I want to first make an important distinction in that I wouldn't actually say that I learned how to play the piano in 1 year. Rather, what I would say I did was that I learned how to play specific pieces of music on the piano, and then through that process, I eventually became more and more familiar with the instrument. And what I mean by that is that in the beginning, I didn't actually spend a whole bunch of time learning how to sight read notes or studying music theory, which definitely is something that most professional piano teachers would probably recommend that you do. Instead, I simply just found a piece of music that I enjoyed, and then found a tutorial video on YouTube that showed which keys to press in order to play that piece of music. I want to see how fast I can learn to play the Turkish March by Mozart. And this type of tutorial video, which you can find for pretty much any piece of music you can imagine, is something called synthesia. And what that means is that it's a video showing you how to play the piece of music that you want to learn through a visual representation. So whenever you see that little small bar of light hitting the keyboard, that's the key you have to press. And as a little side note, that's actually one thing that's super interesting about the piano as an instrument, compared to other string instruments like the violin, for example, or the guitar, where it initially can actually be quite difficult to play specific notes, where with the piano, if you want to play a C note, you simply just press the C key. So using these synthesia videos and eventually moving on to other apps like Flowkey, which are basically based on the same principle, was the main approach that I took to learning the piano. And the benefit here, I think, is that it makes the piano a much less intimidating instrument to get into. You have a keyboard, you pick a piece of music that you like, and then you simply just memorize which order to play the keys in order to play that piece of music. So it keeps the motivation high to keep learning because you're making fast progress, and it doesn't actually take that long before you're eventually playing your first simple piece of music. And that's not even to mention that other than obviously having a keyboard, it's super easy and cheap to get into this way, since you don't have to pay for expensive piano lessons. And the final cool thing about this approach is that it doesn't even have to be at the cost of what some purists might say that you would lose if you were to take this approach instead of doing it the hard way and learning about all of the technical stuff first. Because for me, and now I'm obviously speaking from personal experience, what would happen was that when I had finally memorized a piece of music, at first it would sound terrible. But at least now I knew how to play it, and I had a sense of accomplishment. And the more I practiced, the more comfortable I would get with a piece of music, also meaning that it would be easier to then now get into all the technical stuff, such as dynamics, meaning with which intensity you press the keys, and also being able to play around with tempos or playing a piece of music faster or slower. And finally, once you've really gotten comfortable with a piece of music, you can begin to add actual emotion to the piece. But with all of that said, rounding off the video, I have to add a final disclaimer in that please remember I am not a professional piano teacher. And this sort of practical approach and its efficacy is purely anecdotal and based solely on my own personal experience. So if you've been wanting to get into learning a new instrument, and more specifically in this case, the piano, my invitation to you is to let go of all of those doubts and concerns and try out this approach. And you might end up surprised by the amount of progress you'll be able to make. But with that said, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.